Welcome to the first edition of New York Ahead. I am Gabriella Czarnobay.
And I am Valentin Cataldo. We call ourselves New York Ahead because our aim is to be ahead of the curve when it comes to news, interviews, and features in and out of New York City.
The top of today's news is the race for the Republicans' presidential nomination. Since the beginning of the year, the first caucus and the first two primaries have already taken place. But the reporter Michel de Cerjat found out that a lot of people don't really understand the process.
We are in an electoral year, and while Democrats already agreed that President Obama will run for a second term, Republicans just began the process of choosing their presidential candidate. The first state races have happened, and what's clear is that people still don't understand the whole process of choosing a candidate.
Can you tell the difference between a caucus and a primary?
Not necessarily, no. The caucus is probably what leads up to a primary. So the caucus is just like, basically you have the general opinion, and the primary is where the actual election happens, I'm guessing.
Caucus and a primary? Don't know what a caucus is.
A caucus and a primary? Well, I believe a primary is the actual election, and a caucus is a bunch of people going crazy, right? Talking, yelling at each other, right?
Well, not quite. We went to Robert Shapiro, a professor of political science at Columbia University, for an explanation.
The big difference is that in a primary election, people go to a voting precinct and they vote in the normal way, but only vote for candidates of a particular party. They'll be given a ballot that's for the party that they're registered for. Caucuses are more complicated and they're much slower. That is, people enter a caucus location and then they engage in a process known as caucusing. And what caucusing means is that they basically people interact with each other, talk about the candidates and so forth, and then at the end of the caucus, after the discussion, they vote.
This year, 12 states are having caucuses, while 37 states plus the District of Columbia are holding primaries. The state of Missouri, on the other hand, is going to be the only one that's going to have both of them. In New York City, this is Michel de Cerjat for New York Ahead.
Now, all the candidates and the money and attention that follows them are heading to Florida, where the following primary will take place next Tuesday, January 31st.
While presidential elections are dominating the headlines, it is notable that Occupy Wall Street is very quiet these days.
It was only a few months ago that everyone was talking about Occupy Wall Street. The protests spread all around the globe in more than 900 cities in 80 countries.
This movement, it's like no other that has ever existed. This is not going to go away. We are not going to go away.
At the time, it just seemed like the movement was just getting bigger and bigger. But then police moved in and evicted them from Zuccotti Park. Occupy Wall Street lost its focal point, and since then, they have struggled to regain the attention they had last fall.
The Occupy movement has continued the way that Occupy began. We continue to do a lot of actions. We are continuing to plan actions.
Protesters are meeting in a public atrium in the Deutsche Bank building. There are fewer people gathered, but they say the movement isn't dying. Organizers say they're planning a mass protest vote come November.
Most of us will be voting blank because we don't believe that any of the candidates that have the possibility of winning could ever desire real structural change. That requires structural change at the bottom.
The aims of Occupy Wall Street have not become much clearer over time.
Occupy Wall Street has become a global uprising that doesn't have any demands. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're so inclusive, because we're principally gathering together for a basic call for direct democracy, not a democracy that's run by businesses and corporations.
Critics and even friends of the movement are wondering aloud whether Occupy Wall Street will ever reignite anywhere near the level of interest it enjoyed last year.
Some prominent economists were hopeful that Occupy Wall Street will be the beginning of a real change in America. New York Ahead reporter Michel de Cerjat is here again. She spoke with the special advisor to the UN Secretary General, the economist Jeffrey Sachs.
You said that you support Occupy Wall Street. Do you think this is the beginning of a change in the country?
I believe that the U.S. is ready for a big change because the anti-government period started around 1981. And so we are 30 years into this. And America has a kind of tendency to have 30-year cycles. It's not guaranteed, but you see we're at the end of a period because it exhausted itself. Now we're in a crisis. We need a change of direction. And I think the Occupy Wall Street is starting to channel the dissatisfaction in America, the sense of unfairness. It's putting its finger on some important issues like the illegal behavior of the banks, the unfair tax system, the super wealth at the top and the poverty at the bottom. And this, to my mind, is the beginning of a change of direction in the United States.
Whether the change that Jeffrey Sachs talks about is going to happen or not, it will depend on the results of the upcoming presidential election.
When we come back, New York Ahead reporters fan out to one of the yummiest places in the city. Don't go away.